Well, I want to be clear here, the main topic of the video is not the company policies or decisions. I'm here to talk about their general in-game communications. Although I do have to say, what was Leviathan? I mean, I'm sure that was just a one-off. I'm sure the rest of the Paradox games are doing. What is that, Crusader Kings 3? No, please, not you, not having a Leviathan moment too. Okay, I'm sure it'll be fine. It's all looking good. I mean, let's take a look at your Stellaris. Stellaris, that's doing fine. Look, it's all good. I'm sure that even Victoria 3 is well, at the end of the day, I'm sure the rest of the gaming industry is right. Okay, well at least the games must be better priced than you're making Paradox look like a charity. Okay, you know what? This is somehow more depressing. In the previous video where I talked about the inevitable nature of death. So you know what? Let's move on to the actual topic at hand. Paradox UI, and well, does it lie to you? And before we get into that, time for the classics. A like on the video would be appreciated, if you haven't already, and a subscription would be amazing. Playmaker detected my previous comments, so full mobilization is now necessary, I'm afraid. Something, we ride at dawn. Self-promotion aside, what do I mean about trusting Paradox? Well, what I am referring to is trusting their UI communications. Herein lies their issue. They are actually really good, I would say, around 99% of the time, lulling you into a false sense of security. See, when the game tells you that building this church will give you 0.1 ducats a month, building that church does tend to give you 0.1 ducats a month more. And when you see an event that would give you a chance of something happening, you can assume that if it says 50% chance of A, 50% chance of B, it's going to be a 50-50. Right? Well, kind of. Let's load up CK2 for this one. Well, kind of. Let's load up CK2 for this one. I mean, wow, it's been a while. I've missed this game. If you've ever tried to do EU4 style birding for bad things happening to your character in this game, you tend to find out quite quickly that it's a pretty pointless endeavor. What do I mean by that? Well, the way that RNG works for example, event choices within Crusader Kings 2 is actually tied to the date. Namely, this thing over here, the 1st of January 769. Every single date is then used to generate basically a little like seed for random events. And what that seed would do is basically create a cutoff point where you get like a random number generated from the seed between 1 and 100. I'm simplifying here massively, to be honest. But then what would happen is if an event had 30% chance of happening and 70% chance of not happening, like an event that would give you a chance of getting the brave trait, it would happen 30% of the time, 70% of the time, nothing would happen. What the game would do is it would generate a number, and let's say that number generated from the date would be 28. And it would say that, okay, if the number that was generated is between 1 and 31, then we give you the 30% chance, and if it's generated between 32 and 100, then we give you the 70% chance, because it's whatever number falls into the gap. So, in practice, when you're playing the game, because every single day it generates a new event, generates a new seed for your event outcomes, these distributions of 70% chance of something happening, 30% chance of something else happening, tend to hold, and they tend to hold pretty well. The issue, of course, is that it's not really a random choice happening for you. The decision of what's going to happen once you see that event pop up on your screen, of 50% chance of success, has already been predetermined by the game before you get to click the button. So this does kind of make birding redundant, and especially within IMAP mode in this game, most events pause the game and you can't really get rid of that, meaning that you can't just tick forward a day to change your RNG. It kind of locks you into at least some of your outcomes. Although that can also mean that there are some cases where, for example, you can have a normal 50% chance of success and 85% chance of failure, or you can spend some money to increase your chance of success up to like 30% and a 70% chance of failure. Sometimes spending money can actually change those boundaries around to the extent where a 30% chance of success would actually fail, while a 50% chance of success without spending the money, for example, would actually succeed, simply because of where those bounds that are generated get created. Now, in this case, is Paradox actually lying to you? Not really, unless you really dig into the game files and figure out how this stuff is going on. You're not going to realize that, you're being lied to technically. If you're playing the game, for the most part, a 70% chance of something happening is going to be a 70% chance of something happening, right? You are getting a new seed every single day, so, again, at best, it's a difference in communication. It's honestly, if anything, a lie by omission here. Like, technically, yes, these probabilities are already pre-generated before you click the button, but practically, who cares? With that said, though, that is unfortunately it for Crusader Kings 2. Let's return to EU4. And the thing that I want to address now is actually going to be sieges. See, for the most part, sieges don't lie to you. When you see a minus 64% chance on a siege, or minus 64% progress, That's pretty accurate. You have a minus 64% chance of winning the siege on the next tick. A very quick recap for those unaware of how sieges work. To complete a siege, you need to get the combined value of all of these numbers up to 20. So that's your dice roll, any war progress that you have, the enemy fort level decreases your progress. If it's not blockaded, that decreases your progress, your general siege pips, and your sieging artillery, as well as any phase progress that you've built up over time. Once all of these things add up to 20 or higher, you win the siege. So what this means that is, for example, if you've gained, say, 12 siege progress from sieging, it can go up to 12 for example, if there's a water shortage, you get +2 siege progress and gets added to here. And then if you roll a 14, for example, you'll end up with a 2, -2, which becomes 0, -2 becomes -2, 14 becomes a 12 isn't a 20, you don't win the siege. That's the dice rolls that happens. Well, come super late game, let's say you're sieging a level 1 capital fort that's not blockading. What might actually happen is you might have, say, 6 bonus from artillery, or if you're doing the opponent cage, literally late game, you can have a +7 from that. You'll be fighting a level 1 fort, so this will be a -1, and you'll be sieging it with, say, a +6 general, and you didn't immediately win the sieges, so you get some siege progress. What will basically happen is, at some point, you're going to get to a point where even if you roll a natural 1 on your dice roll, and you roll between a 1 and 14 value, according to the game's basic internal math, is going to say that 1, -1 for the thing, plus, like, 6 from the siege and your generals, +12, plus, let's say you have 8 siege progress, that would come to 20. So even on a 1, you'd win the siege. And so the game communicates that information to you by telling you have a 99% chance of winning that siege. That does not mean that if you were to repeat that siege 100 times, you would win the siege 99 times and lose it, or not immediately win the siege 1% of the time. That is in fact a lie. What supersedes all of the previous calculations is the fact that if you were to roll a 1 on your D14 here, you're going to get a disease outbreak, and you can never win a siege on a disease outbreak. Hence, you run into a fascinating situation where even though technically a 1 is calculated as a win, and hence the game tells you have a 99% chance, or what it should actually be telling you is a 100% chance of winning, that's a lie, because you always have a 7% chance of not progressing. You cannot actually go above a 93% chance on a siege, because you can always roll on that one, and you can always fail to siege the province on the next month. Basically, 99% sieges don't exist. So every time you have a 99% siege and you fail, you're not getting a cosmic natural 100, rolling a 1 on a D100. That's not quite what's happening. You are getting a 1 on a D14, or a 7% chance roll of, well, not winning the siege immediately. This is more of a miscommunication between the game internals of how the sieges actually work versus how it calculates the siege progress towards you. I don't think this is an intentional lie, but it's one that does exist, and it can definitely be very frustrating. But if we're talking breakdown in communications, then there's no better example for EU4 than, of course, whatever is going on with the protect trade math calculations. Now, there has definitely been some hallucinogenic math I've seen in my lifetime. There's been some great probability analysis, because if you think about it, if you buy a lottery ticket, you either win the lottery or you don't. So winning the lottery, probability-wise, is 50% chance, right? Not quite how the math works out on that one. But, you know, I've seen a lot of math in my time, correct and wrong. And I have to say, the mathematics done for ship trade power calculations and how much money they make you are just straight up beyond that in terms of how much things they hallucinate for that progress. So, for example, it's currently claiming me that I'm using my trade power, which is 90% to transport 0.8 ducats forward from the Bordeaux node. That's what I'm doing in the Bordeaux node with my trade power, but I don't have a merchant in there. So what's actually happening is someone like France, who does have a merchant, is passively steering that trade power away. Now, that doesn't mean that if I don't send my ships there, I'm not going to increase the trade power situation, and France is steering the direction I want, etc., etc. But there's a lot going on with trade. A lot, in fact, that Paradox hasn't really taken into account a lot of these things going on within their own protect trade calculations on how much money you're going to make. See, what this does is that it means that it will change, it estimates, it even admits in its own calculation that it estimates this will change a trade value from 0.84 to 1.826 in profit. And the fleet costs us, well, 0.041 in maintenance, therefore we'll be losing 0.00 ducats. Now, this gets weird. It can sometimes hallucinate really weird loss and profit values. That's not quite how, again, that works. Like, for example, it's claiming that if I were to protect trade in the English Channel right now, I would not make any money from that. Counter argument, I'm already paying for these night ships with my fleet maintenance, so, you know, that's a bad comparison. What you have to be taking into account is how many sailors I'm going to be spending on the mission, but that's a separate debate. But sailor costs and money costs, let's not get into it. I'm not going to make an extra 0.4 ducats for protecting the English Channel. Furthermore, if I was, for example, to protect trade in Lübeck, I'll probably make a bit more than their claimed 0.15 ducats. Right? The issue, of course, is not only is this value dependent on a lot more than the things that Paradox is admitting here, it's also dependent on the action of every single AI player thing out there. It cannot calculate, for example, the fact that I'm currently at war with some people that might protect and trade in Lübeck. So if I send my heavy ships out and beat up their light ships that are currently generating trade power in Lübeck, this is going to drastically change the mathematics. In essence, this entire tab is entirely useless because a lot of these numbers are pretty bad at actually predicting you how much money you're going to make. They tend to be excessively pessimistic. Now, this is a relatively obscure tab. I don't think I've seen many people use it, but it does exist. And I think tabs like this just kind of tend to mystify and breed even more confusion about how trade works. I promise you it's not that bad overall. It's definitely been over-mystified. I'd personally say that fort zone of control mechanics are a lot worse than trade, but you know what, that's a debate for another time. With that said, though, this is definitely one of the menus where Paradox does the most amount of hallucinations in terms of the values that it produces from these calculations. So, yeah, where am I going with this entire statement? Well, I think the answer is that 99% of the time, you're good enough to trust Paradox, right? When Paradox tells you that an event has a 50% chance of occurring, most of the time it does, as far as you're concerned, have a 50% chance of occurring. A lot of times when you want to build, for example, a building, well, I can't really afford anything, a workshop, and you want to build a workshop in London, it tells you it's going to make you an extra 0.19 ducats a month. It's going to make you an extra 0.19 ducats a month. You can trust basically 99% of the things within the Paradox UI. The issue, of course, it means that when you do encounter something that cannot be trusted, the 1% of the time, you may end up believing it, even though you really shouldn't. In some cases, like the 99% sieges, it can make you a bit more frustrated. In other cases, you may end up reading the light ship trade protection menu and believe that actually protecting trade in the English Channel will lose you money, which it most likely is not going to be doing that. So for the real conclusion, for the most part, it's fine to trust Paradox. They're not going to be going out of their way to deceive you all of the time. But they certainly haven't earned my blind trust yet. Because remember, even if someone made a fancy UI element that's promising you 300 ducats if you protect trade in Alaska, well, maybe think about what the actual effects of you protecting trade in Alaska are for the entire overall trade economy of the world, instead of just blindly trusting that. But with all that said, that is all I have time for today. Thank you for all the people that have supported me over at Ko-Fi, with a special thank you to Ark and Solar.